I do not care to speak ill of any man behind his back, but I believe the gentleman was an attorney. America? How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the owners of slaves? My nights are flatulent and unquiet. Our triumphant age of plenty is riddled with darker feelings of doubt, cynicism, distrust, boredom, and a strange kind of emptiness. Much may be made of a Scotchman, if he be caught young. This is one of the disadvantages of wine. It makes a man mistake words for thoughts. Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Sir, when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Johnson, and welcome to Literary Lockdown. Today we get to travel back to the 18th century, the late 1700s, which, when I was an English major at the University of Minnesota, was known as the Age of Johnson. Yay! Actually, it isn't about me, of course. It's about Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was a towering figure of London's literary, cultural, social, and even some of the political worlds there. And what you heard at the beginning were just a few of Johnson's very pithy kind of conversational moments right there. Now, his circle in the late 18th century composed of a lot of great writers, people like Oliver Goldsmith and Richard Brinsley Sheridan, the painter Sir Joshua Reynolds, and the great actor David Garrick. And Dr. Johnson was an essayist and a poet, a biographer, and the writer of the Dictionary of the English Language. Imagine. But I don't want to talk about him. I want to talk about a very eager, curious, and somewhat neurotic, but very friendly little peanut of a guy called James Boswell, who arrived in London at the age of 22 to seek his fame and fortune and to meet his great hero, Samuel Johnson. Well, eventually they did meet, and even though Johnson was about 30 years older, they became really good friends. And so Boswell was always around in this circle, sort of on the edges of it, a very likable fellow, but as people said, he was sort of like a moth, hovering around the edges of this very brilliant candle. And as the years rolled by, Boswell never really achieved literary greatness. He became an attorney, but he didn't have a very distinguished career. And after Johnson's death and after his own father's death, then Boswell became sort of a minor nobility as he took on the title of Lord Affleck at the family's Scottish estate. But a few years before he died, something happened. Boswell published a book, and it was a huge book, The Life of Johnson, about his great friend, Dr. Samuel Johnson. And nowadays, people sort of regard it as probably the greatest biography in the English language. And that's because it wasn't just a plodding chronology of Johnson's life. It really captured the whole spirit of the age and the very essence of Samuel Johnson. People felt like he was just coming to life off the pages, the way he spoke, the way he behaved, the way he looked, all the different incidents of daily life and things like that. In fact, even entire conversations were intact in the book. And the people who were still alive said, yeah, I remember it. I think it was exactly like that. Yeah, that's exactly what Sam said. But people never really gave Boswell much credit for this. Oh, they would say, Samuel Johnson is such a great subject and had such a forceful personality. Of course, it would turn out to be a good book. And even later literary critics throughout the whole 19th century and into the 20th century kind of regarded Boswell as kind of a one-hit wonder, this kind of like interesting sort of little literary footnote of a person. But then something else happened. In the 1920s, James Boswell's descendants decided that they were going to rent out their Scottish castle and move to their smaller castle over in Ireland, like you do. It's so Downton Abbey, isn't it? And in the process of moving, they started opening up a lot of old crates and boxes, and there they started to find the diaries of James Boswell. Here's the beginning of Boswell's journal when he was 22 years old and just getting set to head off to London. Begins in part this way. The ancient philosopher certainly gave wise counsel when he said, "Know thyself." I have therefore determined to keep a daily journal in which I shall set down my thoughts on different subjects, the whims that may seize me, and the sallies of my luxuriant imagination. I shall mark the anecdotes and the stories that I hear, the instructive or amusing conversations that I am present at, and the various adventures that I may have. And that is exactly what Boswell did for over 30 years in keeping his journal. They are an amazing record of the late 18th century of daily life, of Boswell's own biography, his thoughts, his feelings, his affairs, his troubles, his many travels, his married life, both in London and in Scotland. And that is how he recorded all of Samuel Johnson's conversations. So the family kept uncovering diaries, and some of them, the pieces of paper were used just like wrap packages. Oh my gosh, it's a James Boswell journal or something. And there was another one that was in this cardboard box that was marked croquet balls. So eventually all of these journals were all collected, and they're now at Yale University. And starting in the 1950s and up through the 1980s, they started publishing every couple years another section of the journal. And so finally, James Boswell sort of has his rightful place in literature. So whereas before people kind of thought, oh, Dr. Johnson up here, James Boswell down there, that tide has really shifted. Not that it's a competition, but now James Boswell is in much higher esteem for what he gave to English literature. So now I just want to finish off with a little taste of Boswell's London journal, the first section of that too. And this is towards the end of that journal. And James Boswell is now 23, and he's getting set to go off and take a grand tour of Europe and then live with some relatives that he had in Holland. And so this is the last meeting of Boswell and Johnson before James Boswell leaves. And then right after that, I'll do just a little bit just from the very end of the London journal. At our last meeting, Dr. Johnson shared with me his walk, a paved long court overshadowed with some trees in a neighboring garden. "Keep a journal all your life, fair and undisguised." "Well, I have done so since I left Scotland." "Indeed, sir, I am pleased that you have pursued so good a plan." "And now, O my journal, art thou not highly dignified? Shalt thou not flourish tenfold? Now is there any argument which can outweigh the sanction of Dr. Samuel Johnson? However, you must keep it private, and have a friend burn it in case of your death." "I have at present such an affection for my journal that it shocks me to think of burning it. I had rather encourage the idea of having it carefully laid up among the archives at home. I put down all sorts of little incidents in it." "There is nothing too little for so little a creature as man. It is by studying little things that we attain the great knowledge of having as little misery and as much happiness as possible. But now, sir, let this be my final counsel. When you are fixed abroad, read with a keenness after knowledge, but when you are moving about, read diligently from the great book of humankind." This is now my last day in London before I set out upon my travels, and makes a very important period in my journal. My mind is strangely agitated. I am happy to think of going upon my travels and seeing the diversity of foreign parts, and yet my feeble mind shrinks somewhat at the idea of leaving London, where I have so comfortably been situated, and where I have enjoyed most happiness. However, I shall be the happier for being abroad as long as I live. Let me be manly. Let me commit myself to the care of my merciful Creator. The end of my journal before my travels.